Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me just fine? Okay, it's my great pleasure to be here. This is a topic dear to my heart. I have been privileged and honored to be involved in robotics journalism. I was the editor of Robot Magazine for almost 8 years and retired 15 months ago. But I'm still involved in media work to some extent in robotics with the foundation, as was just mentioned. And this particular subject, the history, the current status of robotics technology and what the future holds in store for humanity is, I think, a fascinating thing to talk about. And we'll start with the Antikythera mechanism. This was created by the Greeks in 150 BC. And it's an interesting mechanical computer. It's not widely known. It was discovered in 1901 during a dive on a Roman ship, and it was found in the ship, and people didn't really understand what it was, but it turns out that it's a mechanical computer that had built into it 19-year lunar cycles. And with this computer, the ancient Greeks were able to predict full moons, which helped them navigate along the coast of Greece. They were able to predict eclipses, lunar eclipses, and they were able to forecast planting seasons. The fact that the lunar cycles designed into this mechanical computer were themselves, they had a periodicity of 19 years, shows that given the lifespan back then, that there was generations of science that went into the creation of this machine. And I think that it is the first tangible computing device that, to me, on an intuitive level, is representative of one of the finer achievements of antiquity. You know, there have been other speculations on automated irrigation systems and on clocks, and I'm not really addressing those. Those systems have feedback and can be said to be calculating machines in some way. But I'm more wanting to focus at the moment on machines that have a more tangible nature to them. This is the mechanism diagram that was determined through various kinds of X-rays and scanning devices to determine the geometry of the Antikythera mechanism. And these are reproductions today. And I've included the web URLs and source references to the pictures and the ideas that I'm presenting. So if you get a copy of the presentation, you'll be able to find all this. This was the next tangible computing machine, in my opinion, that appeals to me, which was the Babbage difference engine. Charles Babbage designed this during his lifetime, and it was not built until 2002, so it was well over a century after his death before the machine was even created. It was built to engineering specifications of the day in which it was designed. It's a significant machine with 8,000 parts and weighs 5 tons, and it was a polynomial calculating machine able to do basic arithmetic. And it's interesting to hear how this calculator sounds, which I have a 45-second clip here.
And it works, just as Babbage designed it. In its continuing sweep upward, it is mesmerizing. The intricate printing section can be programmed for 1, 2, or 3 column output, for 2 font sizes at once, for variable margins and column gaps, even word wrap where necessary.
It's a little hard to understand the audio.
And simultaneously
it produces a tape printout and plaster repairs molds to produce copies of its output.
When a tray is full, the printer pauses the entire machine.
And then looking at the history of robotics, we have to include Karol Čapek. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his Czech name, but he invented the word robot in a fictional play drama in 1921. And so he's a notable figure in the history of the culture of robots. And this is the ENIAC machine, which was designed in World War II to plot artillery trajectories. And it was later taken over by the U.S. government and confidentially for a period used to calculate certain tests which were designed to simulate thermonuclear explosions. And so this device was used in early research on nuclear weaponry and is a milestone in the history of computers. And I think that before we can talk about robots and artificial intelligence in the future, we have to take a look at the history of the machines themselves. Of course, there was a plethora of personal computers. The Commodore 64 in '82 was one that we probably, most of us who are old enough remember it well. There were any number of additional personal computers in an efflorescence of personal computing at that time. Late 70s, early 80s, and into the early 90s, the names that come to mind, in addition to the Commodore, the Atari, the Apple I, the Radio Shack TRS-80. And these were all part of the gestation of machine intelligence, in my opinion. And of course, on the cultural side, you have to consider the humanoids in our artistic, cinematic history, because what we see in front of us, if you look at the robots that are on the ISS, there's the humanoid robot that's there, and there will be more coming, and they were forecast by the science fiction in past eras. And of course, with Maria from the movie Metropolis in 1927 was a iconic first appearance in cinema, and almost everyone has seen probably The Day the Earth Stood Still with Gort, and of course the Star Wars C-3PO. So I wanted to segue a little bit into the concept of artificial intelligence, and the idea of strong intelligence has been formulated by a number of people. For perhaps the most well-known, Ray Kurzweil, in terms of his concerns about the so-called singularity, when machine intelligence will have capabilities that are comparable, in his view, to the capabilities of human beings. And in sort of a generalized nutshell, when robots are as smart as people, they learn faster than people. Not only are they repairing themselves, but they're reproducing themselves. And at that point in time, hypothetically, they would dominate scientific research. This is when the concept of strong artificial intelligence obtains. The interesting thing is whether the concerns of people like Ray Kurzweil that there might be a runaway sentience, that is, a progression of self-reproducing, evolving robots that could pose a challenge to humankind, which I would term as runaway machine sentience. Whether that is possible, and if it is possible, how we would deal with it. And strong artificial intelligence is an underpinning, an early antecedent, and part of the embryonic beginnings of that progression of technology, if it does take place. Interestingly, Seth Shostak, who's the well-known head of the SETI.org organization, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, he wrote a couple of things for Robot Magazine in my past incarnation when I was editor of that magazine, and he indicated that he felt that there was a very strong chance that if there is contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, it's very likely that that would first be through robot proxies, on both sides for that matter. Our satellites, our robots going out into interstellar space, and beyond the solar system, meeting machines from other civilizations, alien civilizations. As wild and bizarre as that may sound, that may be one of the most likely precursors for first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. One must attend also to the rapidly developing level of robotic intelligence. Humans have recently been defeated at the game of Go, which was considered to be an extremely difficult challenge for computers, but Google took that bull by the horns and produced AlphaGo, which has beat humans consistently. And of course, we all remember when Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion. These events are happening around us, and we see the rise of machine intelligence. Now, I wanted to make a brief digression. The thought of artificial intelligence that could be something that we would have to contend with in the far-fetched future presupposes that you have an idea of what this intelligence would be constituted of. And so what is a mind? Well, let's just think a little bit about what we know and what we don't know about simple organisms that we have studied scientifically. That includes the jumping spider. And these spiders have sophisticated binocular vision that in some cases are superior to some of the more primitive rodents. They have mammalian-like visual systems. And what they did was they took one of these spiders and they put it in a 3D printed couch so that it was pretty much frozen and assumedly comfortably so. And they put electrodes into its poppy seed-sized brain. And there's a limited number of cells in that brain. And there's one central axon that is a major piece of the neural machinery of that poppy seed-sized brain. And what they discovered was that when they put microfilament wires into all the neurons in that brain and that central neuron, that when this spider beheld a fly and realized that it was potentially its next meal and prey, and poised itself to pounce on the fly and then go eat it and consume it, and they did this through repeated experiments, which you can all read about, they found that the mental activity for this multivariate behavior was centralized, was localized in a single neuron in the center of the spider's brain. And that kind of baffled everybody, because how could the calculation of there's prey, I'm going to walk over there and pounce on it and get it, and I'm going to leap on it for the last in the last fraction of a second. How could that multivariate analysis be localized in a single neuron? Well, nobody knows. And it speaks to the problem of the mind versus the body. And it goes back to the classic philosophical problem or the biological problem, the mind-body problem. We don't know what's going on in the spider's quote-unquote mind, if it has a mind. We do know that what is going on is a complicated analysis, and it's happening in one neuron. So, are we going to create robots in the future that will interface with human beings, that will have a mind? I would suppose not. We have localized what we think is a mind in a spider. We have no clue what's really going on in that neuron. But I don't think we have the means to put that kind of operational behavior into a robot in the sense of duplicating the mind or whatever is going on in this spider's brain. So we don't know what a spider's thought really means. And where it leads us in terms of dealing with robots, current robots have the ability to visualize prey and to go seize it and do something with it, just like the spider does. But we don't have any conjecture that current robots have a mind per se. So the robots are duplicating behavior that's complex, but it's not emulating what nature has provided animals. And as an aside, at Rutgers University, they plugged a mobile robot into a plant, and they outfitted the environment so that the robot would attend to the plant's behavior when the plant's turgor pressure went up and the leaves fluffed up and it looked a little bit healthier and happier. The robot would determine where in the halls of the school it was, and would go to where the plant apparently liked to be. And also in terms of being watered. What was really happening, though, was that there was no plant mind. It appeared as such because the plant was scooting around on this mobile robot. What was really going on was that the plant became a biological sensor. And so this is a mobile robot with a hybrid biological silicon sensor system. It's not an indication of plant thought. So the leading proponents of the very polarized position as to whether there will be strong artificial intelligence, or in other words, loosely phrased, as Kurzweil has on the left has characterized it, the singularity, that point at which robots are as smart as people and acting like people, and we really have to deal with them. Whether or not that will ever occur is fiercely debated. And if you haven't seen the commentaries online that are just widely available by these two gentlemen, these two professors, they're worth watching. Kurzweil notes the law of accelerating returns, which is one of his concepts that he's written books about and lectured on quite a lot, is the transcendent nature of our time, where discoveries, accelerating knowledge, more sophisticated technology, it's all happening in shorter and shorter time frames. And the law of accelerating returns reflects the more rapid attainment of technological goals and information and education that continues to logarithmically accelerate, not linearly. And he expects that strong intelligence is going to happen, and may happen within 5 or 10 years, certainly within our lifetimes, and we need to deal with it. Noam Chomsky is a very convincing skeptic. He doesn't buy that. He thinks that Ray Kurzweil is concerned about something which is not going to happen, because we will always have hegemony over the machines. We will always control them. They will not be doing things that we don't program them to do. And so it's an interesting debate between these two intellectual giants. And if you get the slides, you'll see the sources for those pictures and some of the content related to that. Now, in researching the question of artificial intelligence, I came across this website, which I would recommend to all of you. I was absolutely thrilled. The Singularity weblog by a gentleman named, his nickname is Socrates. He has a Russian sounding name. He has interviewed many people, Marvin Minsky, who invented neural networks, the other giants in the field, such as Chomsky and Kurzweil, and many, many dozens of others. It's just staggering. You know, when I discovered this library, I felt like I was a young kid getting into college and being thrilled by the intellectual joy of all that was before me once again. That was how interesting it was. And so I would highly recommend this site for an expansive adventure in further research and content on artificial intelligence. So it bears asking what may be in store for us in the future, which I've alluded to several times already. In terms of this is a so-called semantic domain map. Below image recognition are things that do not see images, and so plants are obviously one of them. Above the image recognition threshold, it's everything that sees images. That includes both today's robots and humans and animals. And the question is whether, like that spider, there is ever going to be a sentience or a creative awareness, which we still don't know how to define properly, that will be embodied in robots, the robots will share, and that will give them a sense of awareness. We don't really have an answer to that. And I think that is the big question. And so, what are the greatest minds and luminaries in our civilization today thinking about this question, whether robots are going to be in that category of awareness and thereby posing a potential competitive force vis-a-vis humanity? And these three gentlemen, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates, none of whom need introductions, have collectively, as is reported at this website among several others, asked the academic and the research community and the scientific community, how are we going to prepare for strong AI? I mean, what are we going to do to deal with it? And this kind of begs the question, well, how far along is strong AI today? And it's interesting to look at the places where the origins of this kind of robotic intelligence may begin. And there are two likely environments in today's world. One is the military-industrial complex. I know that's a cliche, but the development of very smart weaponry by government military. These organizations have the resources to develop robotic intelligence beyond what most other groups in the world can do. And the other, interestingly, I believe, would be the Linux-based open source community. But of course, that group of people are typically inclined, I don't want to call them modern-day techno-hippies, but they're inclined to be very humanistic and very beneficent to society. But it is the case that the economic incentives to develop truly smart robots might emerge and result in the development of the first truly strongly intelligent robotic entities in that Linux community. So I think that the fact that the world has these two different positions diametrically opposed, that there's going to be an issue with strong intelligence, and then those represented by Noam Chomsky, who are very skeptical about this, is very interesting, and the question's open as to what the future will show in that regard. And the question comes, well, if we do develop strong intelligence, how are we going to protect ourselves against the robots that might have an independence that would be so manifested that it could be a threat to humanity? And people make jokes about it. Hang up a sheet on a clothesline in your living room so you can go raid the refrigerator at night, and the bad robots won't see you. That's just a bad joke. And others are more serious about how to possibly deal with this, which is to create an ethos, a philosophy, such as the group at CTES Laboratories. Tracy and Cameron Hughes at that organization have spent the last few decades developing a system of computational ethics or philosophy, a basis to pursue the development of artificial intelligence with safeguards built in that would be protective of humanity and which assumes the involvement of humans in order to avoid the potential nightmare that is envisioned by the doomsayers who are concerned about the threat of artificial intelligence. So if you go to CTES Laboratories, just Google it, you can find interesting work to an attempt to lay the groundwork to prevent the negative potential from evolving in our world. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be pleased to respond. And that's basically.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you describe two. Can you use the mic? Oh, sure. Can everybody hear me? You described these two opposing philosophies, for lack of a better word. Where do you fall in that with as much experience and research as you've done?
I think that you can't really be certain where things will go, and that if there is an opportunity for robots to procreate, reproduce themselves, take control of their own destiny, that there is the potential for a development that would be concerning to people like Ray Kurzweil. You know, already today the IBM Watson computer is developing code, machine code, to program robots in factories, and some people point to that as the very first manifestation of robots creating robots that could begin to slip loose and become potentially a threat to humankind. I kind of think that the humans are going to stay in the loop and make sure that none of that really happens. I don't expect that there will be an easy bridge to a world in which robots are building themselves and allowed to take on their own evolution and allowed to develop their own preferences, so to speak, in terms of what they do. I think it's all going to be closely monitored by people. So I come out on the side of Chomsky, I think, personally.
Hi, very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, in 50 to 100 years, population projections have us over 10 billion people. Have you given any thought to, regardless of the level of sentience, what the future job market will look like for the remaining 10 billion people, or what their quality of life or type of life is like? And, you know, right now we're very dependent on people doing a job. That's how they subsist for the most part. Do you see that changing, going away in the next 100 years?
I think that there has been a somewhat scary trend towards the automation of more and more professions and more jobs. And it's happening at a pace that is not widely recognized. It's happening faster and to more different professions than may be imagined. And it's hard for me to project. The robots will facilitate getting professional work done in almost any imaginable profession. You know, doctors already today, as we all know, relying upon Watson computers to look through 10 million pages in a fraction of a second to look at a profile of a patient, to come up with potential diagnoses that the doctor, him or herself, may only have a few hundred cases of experience in his or her lifetime, but you know, the Watson's looking at tens of, potentially millions of pages. And doctors today are now required in some practices and areas, specialty areas, to use the Watson computer for supplementing their diagnoses. And that is part of a continuing evolution, which is, it may point to a different kind of social organization, you know, as your question asks. I can't really speculate beyond noticing some of the trends currently. Thanks.
Hi. This is kind of a follow-up to that question. There's a blog post out there that kind of captures this, but the idea that the trucking industry, transportation industry, is such an enormous employer. I've come to kind of think about that autonomous trucking replacing all of those workers as sort of the equivalent of the ice sheet in Greenland sliding off on the global warming front. I'm curious if you think there might be some massive hockey stick inflection point where some piece of technology like autonomous vehicles or autonomous trucks or something else sort of overnight causes a massive shift.
I think that it is possible that lies before us. The level of continuing technological innovation in transportation is astounding, and it is the case that it may be that people won't be allowed to drive at some point because the automation will become so safe, and the whole mindset will change. And people will wonder why it took so long for the prohibition on human drivers to be put in place, because the transportation technology in those automated trucks and cars will be so obviously superior in terms of public safety and welfare that there won't be any question about it. I think it could happen all of a sudden. I don't know whether it's in 10 years or 40 years, but I think it's coming, personally.
As an educator, how should this, or should it, intersect with our education of young people in robotics?
I think the more insight that can be provided to young people, absolutely the better. I mean, I would say frame all this, present it to the brightest, minds, who generally are the younger people coming up, and I would see no reason to protect them from these insights, personally.
What would you recommend as a tack to sort of tackle some of the social problems that arise out of our sort of the way that we interact with technology? I mean, we're already having sort of social problems that are coming out of advances in technology. I mean, rates of mental illnesses and things like that have increased so much in the past 200 years. How do you suppose that we address those? And I mean, if all of our jobs are automated in the future, what kind of lives does that leave left for us? How do we have those conversations? How do we sort of grow into what the social future of our society is like?
There have been clarion calls to address the confluence of social change from different points of view. I don't remember any of the people calling for these kinds of meetings right now, but I do remember the substance, which was we should get representatives from academia, from social organizations, from government agencies, from technology companies, and we should have some think tanks coming together and trying to map possible futures and a direction for society given all of this. So I know that there have been a few people trying to formalize addressing these issues, but I don't know of any actual steps taken to do that.
That's all the time we have for questions for today. We're running a little over, so if there's any more questions, please feel free to follow up with Mr. Atwood in the All Access Lounge. And remind you guys again to please review it on the session review on your mobile app. Thanks everyone for coming to the session.
Thank you very much, everyone. Now the question is, can I get down?
Yeah, let me